Look, I've always believed that a parent would do absolutely anything for their child. I mean, anything. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that night. My name's Ryan. I'm 42, and I've been driving for rideshare apps for the past 3 years. Not exactly the career I planned, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expect them. 3 years ago, my world got flipped upside down when my little girl Sophie was diagnosed with leukemia, 8 years old. Man, 8 freaking years old, and she's fighting a battle that would break most grown adults. The divorce papers came shortly after. Turns out some people just can't handle that kind of pressure. Can't say I blame my ex-wife entirely, but it still stung like hell. So there I was, a single dad working nights, driving strangers around the city, trying to scrape together enough money for Sophie's treatments. The insurance covered some of it, sure, but anyone who's dealt with serious medical bills knows that some doesn't cut it. Not even close. The experimental treatments, the special medications, the special assists, all adds up faster than you can blink. I developed this routine. Drop Sophie off at my mom's place every evening around 7 p.m. Grab some coffee that could strip paint off a car, and hit the roads until sunrise. The night shift paid better drunk college kids, airport runs, people stumbling out of bars who tipped generously. Every dollar counted. When your daughter's life hangs in the balance, that particular Tuesday night started like any other. It was mid-October, one of those crisp autumn nights when you can see your breath but it's not quite cold enough for a heavy jacket. I'd already done a few runs, picked up a businessman from the airport, dropped off some partygoers downtown. The usual. It was around 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with a new ride request. The pickup location was in Riverside Heights, one of those middle-class neighborhoods where the houses all look the same but cost more than most people make in 2 years. Not exactly prime time for rideshare requests, especially not at 2 in the morning. But hey, money is money, and I wasn't about to turn down a fare. Pulled up to 1247 Maple Street, a 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn and one of those fancy porch swings that screams American dream. All the lights in the house were off except for one upstairs window. I waited in the driveway for about 30 seconds before I saw the front door crack open. That's when I got my first look at her. She was probably in her late 30s, average height, with shoulder-length brown hair that looked like she'd been running her fingers through it all night. But it was her face that caught my attention. Red, puffy eyes, the kind that comes from crying for hours. She was clutching a medium-sized suitcase in one hand and what looked like a hospital ID badge in the other. She climbed into the back seat without saying a word, just gave me an address across town and slumped against the window. I could see her in the rearview mirror, staring out at the empty streets like she was watching her whole world crumble in real time. Rough night, I asked, trying to break the tension. Sometimes people want to talk, sometimes they don't. After 3 years of this job, you learn to read the room pretty quickly. She looked up at me in the mirror, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Sitting right there on the seat next to her was a brown paper bag. Sticking out of the top were what looked like bundles of cash. Not a few 20s either. We're talking thick stacks of hundreds. More money than I'd seen in one place in my entire life. You could say that, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. I kept driving, but my mind was racing. Who carries that kind of cash around at 2 a.m.? And why did she look like she'd just witnessed a murder? Every instinct I had developed from 3 years of picking up strangers was screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. Listen, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know what's going on here, but if you're in some kind of trouble, maybe I should call the cops. That's when she completely broke down. I'm talking full-on sobbing, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in your soul. She was gasping for air between tears, and for a moment, I thought she might pass out. Please, she managed to choke out. Please don't call anyone. I'm not a bad person. I swear on my son's life, I'm not a bad person. Her son, those 2 words hit me like a freight train because I knew that desperation in her voice. I'd heard it in my own voice every time I talked to Sophie's doctors, every time I got another bill I couldn't afford, every time I lay awake at night wondering if I was doing enough. I pulled over into an empty parking lot outside a 24-hour diner and turned around to face her. What's your name? Maria, she said, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of what I could now see was a hospital scrub top. Maria Santos. Okay, Maria, I'm Ryan, and I want you to know that whatever's in that bag, whatever's going on here, I'm not going to judge you. But if you want my help, and it sounds like you need someone's help, you're going to have to tell me what's happening. She stared at me for a long moment, like she was trying to decide whether she could trust a complete stranger. Then she reached into the bag and pulled out one of the stacks. It was all hundreds, held together with a bank band that read $5. There's $50,000 in here, she said quietly. $50,000? That doesn't belong to me. My heart started pounding so hard, I was sure she could hear it. 50 grand. That was more than I made in an entire year driving for the app companies. That was more than enough to cover Sophie's treatments for the next 6 months, maybe longer. Did you steal it? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. She nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. From the hospital where I work. I'm a nurse at Children's Memorial. I've been there for 12 years, never so much as took a pen home. And tonight, she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Children's Memorial, Sophie's hospital, the place where we'd spent countless hours over the past 3 years, where Dr. Martinez had saved my daughter's life, more times than I could count. This woman worked at the same place where angels and scrubs had become like family to us. Why? Was all I managed to say. Maria looked down at the money in her hands, then back up at me with those desperate eyes. Because my son is dying, and they told me the medication that could save him isn't covered by insurance. Because I've watched too many parents sit in that waiting room and get told their child doesn't qualify for treatment. Because $50,000 was sitting right there in the hospital's emergency fund. And for one crazy moment, I thought I could just fix everything. I sat there in stunned silence, processing what she'd just told me. Here was a woman who had dedicated her life to helping sick children, driven to desperation by a system that put price tags on little lives. A woman who had made a terrible decision for the most understandable reason in the world. What's wrong with your son? I asked. The same thing that's wrong with a lot of the kids we see, she said. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He's 11. His name is David. And he, double quotes. She couldn't finish. The same disease as Sophie. The same nightmare. The same impossible choices. The same feeling of helplessness that ate at you from the inside out. In that moment, Maria Santos wasn't a criminal to me. She was just another parent, drowning in the same ocean I'd been swimming in for 3 years. How long does he have? I asked, without the treatment. Maybe 2 months. With it, she shrugged. Maybe years, maybe a full life. But the treatment costs exactly $50,000. And our insurance company has decided that my son's life isn't worth the investment. I looked at this woman, this nurse who had probably held the hands of dozens of scared parents like me, who had whispered words of comfort to children fighting battles they should never have to fight in. I made a decision that would change everything. Put the money away, I said, starting the car. Back up, we're going to figure this out. What do you mean? I met her eyes in the rearview mirror. I mean that sometimes desperate times call for desperate measure. And Maria, I think we're both pretty desperate right now. As we pulled back onto the empty street, heading toward whatever address she'd given me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this ride was different from all the others. This wasn't just about getting someone from point A to point B. This was about 2 parents, 2 kids, fighting for their lives, and $50,000 that might be the difference between hope and heartbreak. Little did I know, we were about to uncover something that would make Maria's theft look like pocket chain. Guys, you have no idea what's coming next. This woman is about to tell me something that's going to turn my entire world upside down. And trust me, you're not going to see this twist coming. The address Maria had given me led to a small apartment complex on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where hardworking people live paycheck to paycheck, where every dollar matters and dreams sometimes feel like luxuries you can't afford. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed her hands were shaking as she fumbled with her keys. "This is me," she said quietly, but she didn't move to get out of the car. Instead, she sat there staring at the brown paper bag like it contained a live bomb. "Maria," I said, turning around to face her, "before you go up there, I need you to know something. My daughter Sophie's been a patient at Children's Memorial for 3 years. Same disease as your son. So when I tell you I understand what you're going through, I really mean it." Her eyes widened with recognition, then filled with fresh tears. Sophie Martinez, room 314. The little girl with the curly blonde hair who always asks for extra jello. My heart nearly stopped. "You know her?" "Know her? Ryan, I've been her primary nurse for the last 18 months. I'm the one who taught her how to play Go Fish during her chemo sessions. I'm the one who held your hand when she spiked that fever back in July. And we thought, double quotes." She couldn't finish the sentence. The world suddenly felt like it was spinning off its axis. This woman sitting in my back seat, this criminal with $50,000 in stolen money, was one of the angels who had been taking care of my daughter. Maria was the nurse who had stayed late countless nights, who had sung lullabies when Sophie couldn't sleep, who had somehow always known exactly what to say when I felt like I was drowning. "Oh my God," I whispered. "You're that Maria. Sophie talks about you all the time. She calls you her hospital mom." Maria broke down completely then, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. "Ryan, I am so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to put anyone at risk. But David, my David is in the pediatric ward right down the hall from Sophie. And when they told me the insurance wouldn't cover his treatment, I lost it." Wait, I said, my mind racing. "Your son David is in the same ward as Sophie. How have I never seen you there as a parent?" "Because I work the night shift in the emergency department," she explained, wiping her eyes. "I only get to see David during my breaks, and usually he's sleeping. The day shift nurses take care of him during visiting hours when parents are normally there." I've been living this double life for months, taking care of everyone else's kids while watching my own slip away. The cruel irony of it all hit me like a sledgehammer. Here was a woman who had dedicated her life to healing children, who had been a source of comfort and strength for my family during our darkest hours, and she was facing the exact same nightmare I was, whereas actually she had to watch it all unfold from the inside, seeing firsthand how the system failed families like ours. "Tell me about David," I said. Maria's face softened despite her tears. "He's 11, going on 30. Smartest kid you've ever met. He wants to be a doctor someday, just like the ones who are trying to save him. He's been fighting this for 8 months now, longer than most kids his age could handle. The first round of chemo didn't work, and the second round, it bought us time, but not enough." She pulled out her phone and showed me a picture, a thin boy with enormous brown eyes and a baseball cap covering his bald head, grinning at the camera despite the 4 tubes in his arm. He looked so much like Sophie in some ways, that forced bravery that kids with cancer develop, the way they learn to smile through pain that would break most adults. "The doctors found a new treatment protocol at Johns Hopkins," she continued. "It's experimental, but it's showing incredible results. 90% remission rate for kids with David's specific type of leukemia. But because it's not FDA approved yet, insurance won't touch it. $50,000 for a chance at watching my son grow up, so you decided to take it from the hospital's emergency fund," I said, not as a judgment, but as a statement of fact. She nodded. "I've been working at Children's Memorial for 12 years. I've seen that fund used for everything from helicopter transports to buying new equipment. I've watched them spend twice that amount on a single MRI machine, and I thought maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't miss it right away. Maybe I could find a way to pay it back before anyone noticed. How did you even access that kind of money?" Maria let out a bitter laugh. "That's the really messed up part. I'm on the hospital's financial committee. I helped set up the protocols for emergency fund disbursements. I have access to the account because I'm supposed to be one of the trustworthy ones. You know, the one who would never abuse the system." The weight of what she was telling me was staggering. This wasn't some random theft by a desperate stranger. This was a respected healthcare professional, someone who had spent over a decade earning the trust of her colleagues and supervisors, throwing it all away for a chance to save her son's life. "Maria, there's something I don't understand," I said. "If you work at the hospital, if you know the system inside and out, why didn't you try to get David's treatment approved through other channels first?" Her face darkened. "Oh, I tried everything. I submitted 3 different appeals to the insurance company, each one more detailed than the last. I got letters of recommendation from David's oncologist, from the head of pediatrics, from doctors at Johns Hopkins who developed the treatment. I even flew to Chicago on my own dime to present his case to the insurance board in person. And they told me that while they sympathized with my situation, they couldn't set a precedent of covering experimental treatments, even successful ones. They said if they approved David's treatment, they'd have to approve similar requests from thousands of other families, and that would be financially irresponsible." I felt sick to my stomach. How many times had I heard similar explanations? How many nights had I lain awake wondering if there was some treatment out there that could help Sophie? Something that insurance would never cover because it was too new, too expensive, too risky. "There's more," Maria said quietly. "I found out something else when I was digging through the hospital's financial records tonight, something that made me realize the $50,000 I took. It's nothing compared to what's really going on." "What do you mean?" She looked around nervously, like someone might be listening. "Ryan, I think someone at the hospital is stealing from the Children's Cancer Fund. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more." My blood ran cold. The fund that's supposed to help families who can't afford treatment. Exactly. Families like yours, like mine, money that's donated specifically to help kids fight cancer, and someone is siphoning it off. I found discrepancies in the accounts, payments to vendors that don't exist, medical equipment purchases that were never delivered. "Do you know who?" "I have suspicions, but no proof." Yet she clutched the bag tighter. "Ryan, what if I told you that the money I took tonight wasn't really stolen? What if it was just a tiny fraction of what's being stolen from kids like Sophie and David every single day?" I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. If Maria was right, then her desperate act wasn't just about saving her son. It might be the key to exposing a much larger crime that was affecting dozens, maybe hundreds of families. "You're talking about going up against the hospital administration," I said. "These people have lawyers, connections, power. What makes you think we can take them on?" Maria smiled for the first time since she'd gotten in my car, and for a moment I could see the fierce determination that had kept her going through 12 years of watching children fight for their lives. "Because I know where the bodies are buried. Ryan, I've been on the inside for 12 years. I know which accounts the money comes from, which vendors are fake, which administrators have been living way above their salaries. And now that I've crossed the line by taking this money, I don't have anything left to lose." She grabbed my hand through the gap between the seats. "But I can't do it alone. I need someone on the outside, someone who understands what's at stake, someone whose daughter's life depends on exposing the truth just as much as mine." I looked at this woman, this nurse who had cared for my daughter, This mother who was fighting for her son, this unlikely criminal who might actually be the most honest person I'd ever met, and I realized that my life had just taken a turn I never could have imagined. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me. Return this money in a way that exposes the real thief. She said, I'm asking you to help me make sure that David and Sophie and every other kid in that hospital gets the treatment they deserve. And I'm asking you to trust me when I say that by tomorrow night, we're either going to be heroes or we're going to be in jail. I sat there in that parking lot, staring at $50,000 in cash and listening to a plan that sounded absolutely insane. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to walk away, to drop Maria off and pretend this night never happened. But then I thought about Sophie, lying in that hospital bed, trusting me to do whatever it took to help her get better. I thought about David, a kid I'd never met but who was fighting the same battle as my daughter. And I thought about all the other families who were probably getting screwed over by whatever scheme Maria had uncovered. Okay, I said, I'm in. But first, you need to tell me everything. And I mean everything. Maria nodded, clutching that bag of money like it held the key to everything she'd ever hoped for. Folks, I thought I knew what desperation looked like. I thought I understood how far a parent would go for their child. But what Maria told me next, it made my head spin. Because it turns out, the rabbit hole goes way deeper than just a nurse taking money to save her son. We ended up in Maria's tiny one-bedroom apartment at 3 a.m., sitting at her kitchen table with $50,000 in cash spread out between us like some kind of surreal poker game. The place was exactly what you'd expect from a single mom working night shifts to pay medical bills, sparse but clean, with kids' drawings taped to the refrigerator and medical textbooks stacked on every available surface. What I wasn't expecting were the dozens of files scattered across her coffee table, each one labeled with a patient name and case number. As I got closer, I realized they weren't just any files. They were financial records, insurance claims, and treatment approvals for kids in the pediatric cancer ward. Jesus, Maria, I said, picking up one of the folders. How long have you been working on this? 6 months, she replied, making coffee with shaking hands. Ever since I started David's treatment and began really paying attention to how the financial side of things worked, or more accurately, how it didn't work. She handed me a steaming mug and sat down across from me, her nurse ID badge still hanging around her neck like some kind of twisted reminder of who she used to be before tonight. Look at this, she said, pulling out a thick manila folder. The Henderson family, their daughter, Katie, has the same type of leukemia as Sophie and David. Their insurance approved the exact same experimental treatment that was denied for David. And you know why? I shook my head. Because Mr. Henderson works for the insurance company. Different department, not even related to claims. But somehow, his daughter's case got fast-tracked while my son got a form letter rejection. She pulled out another file. The Morrison kid brain tumor needed emergency surgery that would have cost $40,000. Family couldn't afford it, so they applied to the hospital's hardship fund. 3 weeks later, the fund mysteriously didn't have enough money available, and little Jake Morrison died waiting for approval. My stomach turned, but you found evidence that the money was there. Not just there, it was there. Then it disappeared into payments for medical equipment that was never delivered to the hospital. Equipment ordered by Dr. Augustus Williams, the chief financial officer. Dr. Williams. I knew that name. He was the guy who'd given me the polite but firm, "There's nothing more we can do financially" speech when Sophie's treatment costs started mounting. A silver-haired man in an expensive suit who spoke in carefully measured sentences about fiscal responsibility and resource allocation. You think Dr. Williams is behind the missing money? Maria nodded grimly. I think Dr. Williams has been systematically stealing from sick children for years, and I think I can prove it. But here's the thing. Ryan and I can't exactly waltz into the police station with evidence I obtained while committing my own felony. She was right, and we both knew it. Any evidence she'd gathered while having access to confidential financial records would be inadmissible if it came out that she'd stolen $50,000 from the same institution. It was like being the only witness to a murder, but not being able to testify because you were robbing a bank at the time. There's something else, Maria continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. I think Dr. Williams knows that someone's been digging into his business. What makes you say that? Because 3 weeks ago, right after I started really investigating the missing funds, David's treatment protocol suddenly changed. His oncologist, Dr. Patricia Chun, who's been advocating for the Johns Hopkins experimental treatment for months, suddenly reversed her recommendation, said she'd reviewed the case and decided the traditional chemotherapy was a better option. The implication hit me like a punch to the gut. You think Williams threatened her? I think Williams reminded her that her research funding comes through his office, and that questioning treatment decisions above her pay grade might not be. Korea smart. Maria's hands were clenched into fists on the table. The next day, I got a performance review meeting scheduled with HR for questions about my recent work patterns and access to sensitive information. This was getting worse by the minute. Not only had Maria potentially destroyed her career by taking the money, but she'd apparently kicked a hornet's nest that was now buzzing around both her and her son's doctor. "So what's your plan?" I asked, because right now it sounds like you're fighting a battle you can't win. Maria stood up and walked over to a small desk in the corner, returning with a laptop and a USB drive. "My plan is to document everything, get it to someone who can act on it, and make sure Williams goes down for what he's done. But first, I need to return this money in a way that doesn't implicate me." "How the hell are you going to do that?" She smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it looked genuinely hopeful. "By making it look like Williams returned it himself." I stared at her. "You've completely lost your mind." "Have I? Think about it, Ryan. Williams has been moving money around for years, without anyone questioning him. What's one more financial transaction, especially if it looks like he's trying to cover his tracks?" She pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop, showing various hospital accounts and fund transfers. The numbers were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars moving in and out of accounts with vague descriptions like equipment, maintenance, and consulting services. "I still have access to the financial systems until tomorrow morning, when my shift officially ends," she explained. "If I can make it look like Williams transferred $50,000 back to the emergency fund to cover up his other activities, then the money gets returned and attention gets focused on him instead of me. And what if you get caught? Then I go to prison for a crime I actually committed, instead of letting Williams keep stealing from families like ours." She looked at me with those determined eyes again. "Ryan, David has maybe 6 weeks left without that treatment. If I do nothing, he dies. If I try this and get caught, at least there's a chance someone will investigate Williams and stop this from happening to other kids." I sat there staring at this woman who was willing to risk everything for her son and for children she'd never even met. It was noble and terrifying and completely insane, all at the same time. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to be my alibi," she said. "If anyone questions where I was tonight or how I knew about the missing money, I need someone who can confirm that I discovered Williams' theft while we were investigating the hospital's financial irregularities together." "But that's not true, isn't it?" She gestured to the files spread across the table. "You're here. You've seen the evidence. You know what he's been doing. As far as anyone needs to know, you came to me because you were concerned about Sophie's treatment cost, and we started digging into the hospital's financial assistance programs together. It was a reasonable cover story, except for one major problem. Maria, I'm a rideshare driver. Why would anyone believe I was qualified to investigate hospital finances? Because your ex-wife is Sarah Mitchell, the forensic accountant who exposed the fraud at City General 3 years ago." My blood ran cold. "How do you know about Sarah?" "Because I do my homework. Ryan, when I recognized your name from Sophie's files, I looked you up. Your ex-wife made headlines when she uncovered that $1 million embezzlement scheme. Anyone who hears that story would believe you learned enough from her to spot financial irregularity." She was right, though it stung to be reminded of Sarah's career success. My ex-wife really was a brilliant forensic accountant, and she really had been the one to expose massive fraud at another hospital. The irony that I was now sitting in a stranger's kitchen planning to expose similar fraud wasn't lost on me. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You want me to help you frame Dr. Williams for returning money he actually didn't steal. In order to expose the money he did steal, all while covering up the money you definitely did steal. That's about the size of it." "Yeah." I looked around Maria's apartment, at the medical bills stacked on her counter, at the photo of David on the refrigerator, at the desperation that hung in the air like smoke. Then I thought about Sophie, sleeping peacefully at my mother's house, trusting that her dad would do whatever it took to keep her safe and healthy. "If we do this and it goes wrong, we're both going to prison," I said. "If we don't do this, David dies, and Williams keeps stealing from families until someone else gets desperate enough to stop him." She had a point. Williams had been getting away with this for years, growing bolder and greedier. While parents like us watched our children suffer, someone had to stand up to him, even if that someone was a nurse who'd crossed the line and a rideshare driver who had no business getting involved in financial crimes. "All right," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Let's take down Dr. Williams. But first, you need to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how bad this gets, we don't let our kids pay the price for our choices. Sophie and David have been through enough already." Maria reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "I promise. And Ryan, thank you. I know you didn't ask for any of this." "Yeah, well," I said, looking at the clock on her wall. "It was almost 4 a.m. Neither did you. Sometimes life just throws you curveballs, and you either swing or watch them go by." As we started planning our next move, I couldn't help but think about how much my life had changed in the span of 2 hours. I'd gone from being a single dad driving strangers around to becoming a co-conspirator in a plan to expose hospital corruption. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and probably the most important thing I'd ever done. Guys, I wish I could tell you that we had it all figured out, that we had some brilliant master plan that was guaranteed to work. But the truth is, we were just two desperate parents making it up as we went along, trying to do right by our kids in a system that seemed designed to work against us. And what happened next? Well, let's just say that Dr. Williams was about to have a very bad morning. By 5 a.m., we had what could generously be called a plan, though desperate Hail Mary might have been more accurate. Maria was going to return to the hospital for her regular shift, act completely normal, and wait for the right moment to execute our scheme. I was going to go home, get a few hours of sleep, and then meet her back at Children's Memorial that afternoon to put everything in motion. What we didn't expect was the phone call that changed everything. I was just pulling into my driveway when Maria's number lit up my phone. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Ryan, you need to get to the hospital right now," she sobbed. "Something's happened. Something terrible." My heart stopped. "Is it Sophie? Is she okay?" "Sophie's fine. But David, ... Oh God, Ryan, David collapsed during the night. They've moved him to the ICU. I did a U-turn so fast, I probably left tire marks on the asphalt. 20 minutes later, I was running through the halls of Children's Memorial, following signs to the intensive care unit. I found Maria in the family waiting room, still in her scrubs from the night before, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. "What happened?" I asked, sitting down beside her. His white blood cell count spiked overnight. His fever hit 104, and he started having seizures. "They've got him sedated now, but Dr. Chen says ... She couldn't finish the sentence. "Says what?" "Says we're looking at days, maybe weeks, instead of months." Maria looked at me with hollow eyes. "The experimental treatment was our long shot, Ryan. Now it might be our only shot." I felt sick. This kid I'd never met, this brave 11-year-old who wanted to be a doctor, was running out of time faster than anyone had predicted. And sitting in that bag back at Maria's apartment was $50,000 that could save his life, money that we'd been planning to use in an elaborate scheme to expose hospital corruption. "Maria, forget about Williams. Forget about the plan. Let's just use the money for David's treatment." She shook her head firmly. "No, absolutely not." "What do you mean?" "No, your son is dying, and so are dozens of other kids because of what Williams is doing," she said, her voice rising before she caught herself and lowered it. "Ryan, if we use that money to pay for David's treatment, we're just another family getting screwed by the system. Williams keeps stealing, more kids die, and nothing changes. But David lives. Maybe Williams finds out where we got $50,000 in cash and we both end up in prison while David dies anyway." She grabbed my arm. "There's something I didn't tell you last night. Something I found in Williams' files that changes everything." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo she'd taken of a computer screen. It was a spreadsheet showing dozens of names, ages, and dollar amounts. "This is Williams' priority list," she explained. "Kids who are getting experimental treatments approved based on their families' ability to pay bribes or make substantial donations to the hospital." I scanned the list, and my blood turned to ice water. There, halfway down, was a name I recognized. Sophie Martinez, $75,000. Treatment approved pending donation. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. "It's Williams' insurance policy," Maria said grimly. "He's been approving treatments for kids whose families can pay under the table, while denying the same treatments to families who can't. And Ryan, ... Sophie's name is on that list." The world started spinning. "That's impossible. We never paid any bribe. Sophie's treatment was approved through regular channels." "Are you sure about that?" I thought back to the past 3 years, trying to remember how Sophie's treatments had been approved. There had been so much paperwork, so many meetings with doctors and insurance representatives, but there was one meeting I'd forgotten about. A meeting with Dr. Williams himself, right after Sophie's diagnosis. "Oh my God," I said, the memory flooding back. "My ex-wife, Sarah. After the divorce, she came to one of Sophie's appointments. She and Williams had a private conversation, and afterward, all of Sophie's treatments started getting approved without question." "What did she say to him?" I never asked. I was so relieved that the insurance wasn't fighting us anymore. I didn't want to rock the boat. I felt sick thinking about it. "You think Sarah paid him off?" "I think Sarah did what any parent would do. She found a way to make sure her daughter got the care she needed." "But Ryan, do you understand what this means?" I was starting to, and I didn't like where this was headed. "It means Sophie's treatments have been funded by money stolen from other kids," Maria continued. "Money that should have gone to children like David, like the Morrison boy who died waiting for approval." The weight of that realization was crushing. For 3 years, I'd been grateful that Sophie's care was covered, never questioning why we seemed to have fewer problems with insurance than other families I met in the waiting room. I'd assumed we were just lucky, that we had better doctors or better insurance, or that Sophie's case was somehow more straightforward. "So what are you saying?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "I'm saying that if we expose Williams, Sophie's treatments might get called into question. If his whole system gets investigated, they might discover that her approvals were based on illegal payments, and they'd stop her treatment. They might, probably would, actually, The hospital would want to distance itself from anything connected to William's scheme. I sat there in that waiting room, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the quiet desperation of other families, and realized that we weren't just planning to take down a corrupt administrator. We were potentially sacrificing my own daughter's care to save other children. This is insane, I said. You're asking me to risk Sophie's life to expose Williams. No, Maria said quietly. I'm asking you to help me save all of them. Sophie, David, and every other kid who's going to need treatment after we're gone. Before I could respond, Dr. Patricia Chen appeared in the waiting room. She looked exhausted, like she'd been up all night, and her usually perfect composure was cracking around the edges. Maria, I need to speak with you privately, she said, glancing nervously at me. Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Ryan. Maria replied, he's helping me with David's case. Dr. Chen looked around the waiting room, then sat down across from us. Maria, I got a call this morning from Dr. Williams' office. He wants to meet with both of us this afternoon to discuss David's treatment options. What kind of treatment options? I asked. Dr. Chen looked uncomfortable. He says there might be some additional funding available for experimental treatments, but that it would require ... discretion ... from the family. Maria and I exchanged glances. Williams was making his move. What kind of discretion? Maria asked. He didn't specify over the phone, but Maria ... Dr. Chen leaned forward and lowered her voice. I think he knows. You've been asking questions about the hospital's financial practices. I think this meeting is either an attempt to buy your silence or a trap, or both, I muttered. Dr. Chen nodded. I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about the research funding and the pressure I've been under to change my treatment recommendations. I think you're right about Williams. I think he's been manipulating treatment decisions for years. This was the break we needed. If Dr. Chen was willing to go on record about Williams' interference with medical decisions, we might actually have a chance to expose him. Dr. Chen, Maria said carefully, if I told you that Ryan and I have been documenting evidence of financial irregularities in the hospital's emergency funds, would you be willing to help us present that evidence to the authorities? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks to her career against the potential benefits to her patients. Finally, she nodded. Yes, but we'd need to be very careful about how we do this. Williams has connections throughout the hospital, administration, and probably beyond that. What do you suggest? I asked. I suggest we take the meeting with Williams this afternoon, Dr. Chen said. Let him make his offer. Whatever it is, get him on record, and then we take everything we have to the State Medical Board and the FBI. The FBI, I said, my voice cracking slightly. Ryan, if Maria's evidence shows what I think it shows, we're talking about healthcare fraud in the millions of dollars. That's federal territory. Maria looked at me with those determined eyes again. Are you still in? I thought about Sophie, sleeping peacefully while her treatments were being funded by stolen money. I thought about David, fighting for his life in the ICU while his mother risked everything to save him. I thought about all the families I'd seen in this hospital over the past 3 years, the ones who looked like they were drowning in bills and desperation while others seemed to glide through the system without problems. Yeah, I said. I'm still in, but first, we need to make sure that $50,000 gets back where it belongs, without Williams knowing Maria took it. Dr. Chen looked confused. $50,000 what? Maria and I exchanged another glance. We were about to bring Dr. Chen into our conspiracy, which meant trusting her with information that could destroy all of our lives. Dr. Chen, I said, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound completely insane, but I need you to hear me out. People, I thought we were in deep before, but this is where things got really complicated. Because when you're planning to take down a corrupt hospital administrator, it's one thing. But when that administrator starts making offers you can't refuse, that's when you realize you're not just fighting for your kids anymore. You're fighting for your lives. Dr. Chin's office was tucked away on the 4th floor of Children's Memorial, a cramped space filled with medical journals, patient files, and photos of smiling kids who beaten cancer. As Maria and I laid out everything we discovered about Williams' operation, I watched Dr. Chin's expression change from skepticism to horror to grim determination. Jesus Christ, she whispered when Maria finished explaining about the $50,000. Maria, do you understand what you've done? If Williams finds out you accessed that account, he won't, Maria said firmly, because we're going to make it look like he moved the money himself to cover his tracks. And how exactly are we going to do that? I pulled out my laptop and opened the files Maria had copied onto a USB drive. Because your friend Williams has been sloppy. Look at this. The spreadsheet I showed Dr. Chen contained 3 years' worth of financial transactions, all authorized by Williams' administrative code. Payments to companies that didn't exist, medical equipment purchases that were never delivered, consulting fees for services that were never rendered. He's stolen over $2 million Dr. Chen said, scrolling through the data. $2 million, that should have gone to patient care. It gets worse, Maria added, pulling up another file. Look at the timing of these transactions. They consistently happen right after families apply for financial assistance through the hospital's hardship fund. Dr. Chen studied the date, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. He's been stealing the money as soon as families qualify for help. That's why so many applications get denied for insufficient funds. Exactly. And then he turns around and offers to approve treatments for families who can pay him directly. I showed her the priority list again. It's not just corruption, Dr. Chen. It's systematic extortion of desperate parents. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence we'd laid out. Finally, she looked up at us with steel in her eyes. What do you need me to do? We need you to help us document Williams' interference with medical decisions, Maria said. If we can prove he's been pressuring doctors to change their treatment recommendations based on financial considerations, that adds medical malpractice to the fraud charges. I can do that. I've been keeping notes about the pressure I've received regarding David's case, and I know other doctors who've had similar experiences. Dr. Chen paused. But there's something else you need to know. Williams isn't working alone. Maria and I exchanged glances.
What?
Do you mean? I mean he's got connections throughout the hospital administration, and probably with some board members too. The kind of money we're talking about doesn't go unnoticed unless people in high places are looking the other way. Do you know who else is involved? I have suspicions, but no proof. Yet, Dr. Chen pulled out her own laptop. But I know how to get it. Williams has been pushing for a new electronic medical record system that would give his office more access to patient financial information. The vendor meetings have been happening in the executive conference room. And guess what? But I asked. That conference room has been equipped with a new audio-visual system for teleconferencing, a system that automatically records all meetings for quality assurance purposes. Maria smiled for the first time in hours. You're saying we can access recordings of Williams discussing his operation? I'm saying I can access those recordings, as long as we do it today, before the weekend maintenance wipes the servers. This was exactly what we needed, direct evidence of Williams discussing his schemes with his co-conspirators. But it also meant we were about to cross another line from which there would be no return. Dr. Chen, I said, if we do this and get caught, your career is over. Are you sure you want to risk that? She looked at the photos on her wall, dozens of children she'd treated over the years. Kids like Sophie and David who'd fought battles they should never have had to fight. Ryan, I became a doctor to save children's lives. If I stand by and let Williams keep stealing money that could fund treatments for my patients, then I'm not really a doctor anymore, am I? We spent the next 2 hours planning our approach. Dr. Chen would access the conference room, recordings during the lunch hour when the administrative staff was minimal. Maria would return the $50,000 to the emergency fund using Williams' own authorization code, making it look like he was moving money to cover his tracks, and I would keep watch and coordinate our activities using burner phones we picked up at a convenience store. At 11:30 a.m., we put our plan into motion. I stationed myself in the hospital cafeteria with a clear view of the elevators leading to the administrative floors. Maria headed to the financial offices on the 3rd floor, where she still had legitimate access until her shift officially ended. Dr. Chen went to the 4th floor to access the conference room recordings. For 30 minutes, everything went according to plan. Maria texted that she'd successfully transferred the $50,000 back to the emergency fund, using a transaction code that would make it look like Williams was consolidating accounts. Dr. Chen reported that she'd found the recordings we needed and was copying them to an encrypted drive. That's when everything went sideways. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Martinez, this is Dr. Williams' office. We need you to come to the executive suite immediately to discuss your daughter's treatment. My blood ran cold. Williams knew I was here. Somehow he'd connected me to Maria's investigation, and now he was making his move. I texted both Maria and Dr. Chen. Abort, Williams knows. Get out now. But it was too late. As I watched from the cafeteria, I saw hospital security guards heading toward both the 3rd and 4th floors. Williams hadn't just figured out what we were doing, he'd been watching us the whole time. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Martinez, came Williams' smooth, cultured voice. I think it's time we had a conversation. Executive suite, 5th floor. Come alone, or I'm afraid your daughter's treatment authorization might experience some unfortunate delays. The line went dead. I sat there in the cafeteria, surrounded by the normal sounds of hospital life. Families talking quietly, nurses grabbing quick lunches, the distant beeping of medical equipment, and realized that our amateur investigation had just turned into something much more dangerous. Williams wasn't just a corrupt administrator stealing money. He was someone who'd built a network of corruption so extensive that he could mobilize hospital security and threaten patients' care with a single phone call. Someone who'd been playing this game long enough to stay 3 steps ahead of people like us. I texted Maria and Dr. Chen one more time. Whatever happens, don't come looking for me. Get the evidence to the FBI. Then I headed for the elevator, knowing I was walking into a trap but having no choice but to spring it. The executive suite was on the 5th floor, behind heavy wooden doors that screamed money and power. William's secretary, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, gestured toward the corner office without saying a word. Dr. Augustus Williams was exactly what you'd expect from a hospital administrator who'd been stealing from sick children for years. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. His office was decorated with medical degrees, awards for hospital service, and photos of him shaking hands with various politicians and donors. "Mr. Martinez," he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk. "Please, sit down. We have quite a lot to discuss." "I don't think we do," I replied, remaining standing. "Oh, but we do." Williams pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it on the desk between us. "You see, I know all about your little investigation with Nurse Santos. I know about the financial records she's been copying, the after-hours access to restricted systems, the $50,000 she stole and returned this morning." He opened the folder, revealing surveillance photos of Maria and me in the hospital parking lot in her apartment, in Dr. Chen's office. "I also know about Dr. Chen's involvement in accessing confidential recordings and about your ex-wife's previous arrangement regarding Sophie's treatment approval." My heart sank. Williams had been watching us from the beginning. "What do you want?" I asked. Williams smiled that cold smile again. "I want to offer you a deal, Mr. Martinez. A deal that ensures your daughter continues to receive the best possible care, and that ensures Nurse Santos' son gets the experimental treatment he desperately needs. In exchange for what? In exchange for your silence and your cooperation in making this whole unpleasant situation disappear." He pulled out another folder, this one containing what looked like legal documents. "You're going to sign a statement saying that you and Nurse Santos discovered some minor accounting irregularities, which have now been corrected. You're going to apologize for any confusion your amateur investigation may have caused, and you're going to forget that any of this ever happened. And if I refuse," Williams' expression turned ice cold, "if you refuse, then Sophie's treatment gets reviewed for insurance fraud. Nurse Santos gets arrested for theft of hospital funds. Dr. Chen loses her medical license for violating patient privacy. And David Santos dies waiting for a treatment that never gets approved." I stared at this man, this monster in a physician's coat and realized that we'd never really had a chance. He'd built his operation too well, protected himself too thoroughly, anticipated every move we might make. But as I stood there in his office, surrounded by his symbols of power and authority, I thought about something Maria had said. Sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. Williams thought he held all the cards. What he didn't know was that desperate parents don't play by the same rules as hospital administrators. "You know what, Dr. Williams?" I said, reaching for the documents. "You're absolutely right. Let me sign those papers." Folks, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking Ryan just gave up, that Williams won. But remember what I told you at the beginning of this story, sometimes things aren't what they seem. And sometimes, when you're fighting for your child's life, you have to be willing to make sacrifices that would terrify most people. I reached for the pen Williams was offering, my hand surprisingly steady considering my heart was pounding like a jackhammer. But just as my fingers touched the documents, I stopped. "Actually, Dr. Williams, before I sign anything, I'd like to understand exactly what kind of deal we're talking about here." Williams raised an eyebrow, clearly not used to people questioning his authority. I thought I was quite clear. "Mr. Martinez, your silence in exchange for your daughter's continued care." "Right, but see, here's the thing that's bugging me." I sat down in the leather chair and leaned back casually, like we were discussing the weather instead of blackmail. "How exactly are you planning to fund David's experimental treatment? Because, according to Maria's research, the hospital's emergency fund has been pretty thoroughly cleaned out." Williams' smile flickered for just a moment. "I'm sure we can find the necessary resources. From where? The same phantom vendors you've been paying for non-existent medical equipment. Or maybe from the consulting fees you've been collecting from companies that exist only on paper." The smile disappeared entirely. "Mr. Martinez, I think you're overestimating your understanding of hospital finances maybe, or maybe I'm underestimating yours." I pulled out my phone and set it on his desk. "See, the funny thing about having a forensic accountant for an ex-wife is that you pick up a few tricks along the way, like how to track money laundering through shell companies." Williams' face had gone pale, but he was trying to maintain his composure. "I have no idea what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, Doc. I'm stating facts." I opened my phone and showed him a spreadsheet I'd been working on during the drive over. Meridian Medical Consulting received $180,000 from Children's Memorial for administrative services last year. Except Meridian Medical Docent Consulting doesn't actually exist. The address on file is a P.O. box in Delaware, and the phone number goes to a voicemail service. Williams reached for his desk phone, probably to call security, but I kept talking. "Then there's Advanced Healthcare Solutions. Received $240,000 for equipment maintenance, except when I called their listed phone number this morning. It went to a pizza place in Newark. Funny thing about embezzling money, Dr. Williams, it's really hard to cover your tracks when you're dealing with amounts this large. You have no proof of anything, Williams said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Don't I? I stood up and walked over to his window, which overlooked the hospital's main parking lot. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the FBI agrees with my assessment. Williams spun around to look out the window, and his face went white as a sheet. 3 black SUVs had just pulled into the parking lot, and federal agents were getting out of each vehicle. You son of a bitch, he whispered. Actually, Dr. Williams, that would be Maria who deserves the credit. See, while you were busy watching us bumble around playing amateur detective, she was doing something much smarter. I turned back to face him. She was building a real case. The office door opened, and Maria walked in, no longer looking like the desperate, crying woman from my back seat. She looked professional, confident, and absolutely furious. Hello, Augustus, she said coolly. I think it's time we had that conversation about David's treatment. Williams looked between us, clearly trying to figure out how his carefully laid trap had turned into an ambush. What the hell is going on here? What's going on? Maria said. Is that you've been systematically stealing from sick children for over 3 years, and we have documented evidence of every transaction. She pulled out a thick folder and dropped it on his desk. Bank records, vendor invoices, email communications, recorded phone calls. Oh, and Dr. Williams, that conversation you had with the pharmaceutical rep last month about inflating medication costs, the one where you discussed your cut of the profits. We have that on tape. Williams' hands were shaking as he reached for the folder. How did I get access to your private communications? Maria smiled grimly. Because I've been working here for 12 years. Augustus, I know which systems you use, which passwords you recycle, which vendors you trust, and I know that you're arrogant enough to conduct your illegal business from your hospital computer. This is entrapment. None of this will hold up in court. Actually, it will, I said, enjoying the look of panic spreading across his face. Because Maria didn't gather this evidence as part of any criminal investigation, she gathered it as a concerned employee, reporting suspected fraud to the appropriate authority. The door opened again, and Dr. Chen walked in with 2 men in dark suits, FBI agents, judging by their badges and the no-nonsense expressions on their faces. Dr. Williams, the taller agent said, I'm Special Agent Thompson with the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Division. We have some questions we'd like to ask you. Williams looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting between the agents, the evidence on his desk, and the 3 of us who'd just destroyed his carefully constructed empire. I want my lawyer, he said. That's certainly you're right, Agent Thompson replied. But first, we need to discuss the immediate welfare of the patients whose treatments you've been manipulating. The second agent, a woman with sharp features and an even sharper stare, stepped forward. Dr. Williams, we have evidence that you've been denying medical treatments to children, based on their family's inability to pay bribe. We're prepared to file federal charges for healthcare fraud, extortion, and endangering the welfare of minors. Williams slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him as he realized the game was over. What do you want? We want full cooperation, Agent Thompson said. Names of your co-conspirators, bank account information, details about every family you've extorted money from. In exchange, we'll recommend a reduced sentence. And if I refuse, the female agent smiled coldly, then you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison, and we'll seize every asset you've acquired through your criminal activity. Your choice. Williams looked at Maria with pure hatred in his eyes. You stupid bitch, do you have any idea what you've done? The board will shut down the entire pediatric cancer program rather than deal with this scandal. Your son will die, and so will dozens of other kids. That's when Maria did something that still gives me chills when I think about it. She walked over to Williams' desk, leaned down so she was eye level with him, and spoke in the same gentle voice I'd heard her use with frightened children. Augustus, my son, is going to live. Sophie Martinez is going to live. And every other child in this hospital is going to get the treatment they deserve, regardless of their family's bank account. You know why? Williams just stared at her. Because the $50,000 I stole last night, it was never really stolen. It was withdrawn as part of an authorized FBI investigation into healthcare fraud at this hospital. An investigation that's been going on for 6 months, with full cooperation from hospital administration. The room went dead silent. Williams' face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, crushing realization. That's right, Augustus, Agent Thompson said. Nurse Santos has been working with federal investigators since March, when her initial reports about financial irregularities reached our office. Everything that's happened in the past 24 hours has been part of a carefully orchestrated operation to gather evidence of your criminal activities. I looked at Maria with new respect and a healthy dose of shock. You've been undercover this entire time. Not undercover exactly, she said, just very careful about who I trusted and when. I needed someone on the outside who could help verify my findings and serve as a witness to Williams' activities. When I realized Ryan was Sophie's father, I knew he was perfect for the role. The crying, the desperation, the stolen money, all real. Maria interrupted. David really is dying. The money really was taken from the emergency fund, and I really was desperate enough to steal it. But I was also smart enough to call the FBI before I did anything irreversible. Williams finally found his voice. So this whole thing was a setup. This whole thing, Agent Thompson said, was a successful investigation into one of the largest healthcare fraud schemes we've seen in recent years. Thanks to Nurse Santos' cooperation and Mr. Martinez's assistance, we have enough evidence to shut down your operation and recover millions of dollars for patient care. As the agents began reading Williams's rights, I felt a mixture of relief, admiration, and sheer exhaustion. We'd done it. We'd actually taken down one of the most powerful men in the hospital, exposed a massive fraud scheme, and potentially saved hundreds of children's lives. But as Williams was led away in handcuffs, he turned back to look at Maria one last time. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice filled with venom. "You think arresting me solves anything? I'm just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and the people above me don't like loose ends." The agents ushered him out, but his words hung in the air like a threat. Maria slumped against the wall, suddenly looking every bit as exhausted as I felt. "Ryan, I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth from the beginning, but I needed to know if you were really willing to fight for what's right, even when it seemed impossible. Are we safe now?" I asked Williams. "David, Sophia's it over?" Agent Thompson overheard my question. "Williams is going away for a long time and will be freezing all the assets he stole. As for the children's treatments, the hospital will be required to honor all approved care, and the recovered funds will be used to establish a legitimate hardship program." It sounded like good news, but something about Williams' parting words was nagging at me. If he was just one piece of a larger puzzle, then who else was involved? And how far up did this corruption go? Guys, I thought catching Williams was the end of our story. I thought we'd won, that justice had been served, and our kids were safe. But you know what they say about thinking it can get you into a whole lot of trouble, because Williams' warning about people above him was about to become very, very real. I should have known it was too easy. I mean, when has anything involving sick kids and hospital bureaucracy ever been straightforward? Williams had been in custody for exactly 18 hours when everything started falling apart. The call came at 6 a.m. from Agent Thompson, waking me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. Sophie was curled up next to me in bedsheet, had a rough night, and crawled in around midnight, something she'd been doing more often lately when the nightmares hit. "Ryan, we need you and Maria at the federal building immediately." Thompson's voice was grim. "Williams made bail, and there's been a development." "What kind of development?" I whispered, trying not to wake Sophie. "The kind that makes me think Williams wasn't bluffing about having powerful friends." An hour later, Maria and I were sitting in a sterile conference room at the FBI field office, watching Agent Thompson pace back and forth like a caged tiger. Dr. Chen was there too, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Let me guess," Thompson said, throwing a newspaper down on the table. "None of you have seen this morning's headlines." The front page of the city paper screamed, "Hospital employees frame beloved administrator in elaborate embezzlement scheme." Below that, in smaller print, "FBI investigation reveals shocking depths of corruption among nursing staff." My stomach dropped. What the hell is this? This, Agent Thompson said, is what happens when your target has friends in high places. Someone leaked details of our investigation to the press, but they've completely flipped the narrative. Maria grabbed the paper and started reading aloud. Dr. Augustus Williams, a respected hospital administrator with over 20 years of service, was arrested yesterday in what federal sources now describe as an elaborate frame job orchestrated by disgruntled employees seeking to cover their own financial crime. Insane, Dr. Chen said. "We have evidence, we have recordings. Evidence that's now being called into question." Thompson replied, "Williams' lawyers are claiming that Maria accessed confidential systems illegally, that the recordings were obtained without proper warrants, and that the whole investigation was compromised from the start." I felt the world tilting sideways again. "But Maria was working with you. She was authorized to gather that evidence." "That's where things get complicated," Thompson said, sitting down heavily. "Maria was working with us, yes, but the authorization for her activities came through channels that are now claiming they never approved her access to Williams' financial record." Maria's face had gone completely white. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that someone very high up in either the hospital system or the federal bureaucracy has decided to throw you under the bus to protect Williams." Thompson looked genuinely pained. "As of this morning, you're being charged with theft of hospital funds, unauthorized access to confidential systems, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The room went dead silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. 6 months of careful investigation, solid evidence of massive fraud, and somehow, Williams had managed to turn it all around. "What about David's treatment?" Maria asked quietly. "Hospital administration has suspended all experimental treatment approvals pending a full review of the pediatric cancer program," Thompson said. "They're calling it a necessary precaution to ensure proper protocols are followed." Maria started crying then, not the desperate sobs from the night we met, but the quiet, broken tears of someone whose whose last hope had just been ripped away. And Sophie? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Sophie's current treatment continues for now, but any future approvals will be subject to enhanced scrutiny. Thompson looked at me with sympathy. Ryan, I'm sorry. We walked into this thinking we were taking down a single corrupt administrator. It turns out we were threatening something much bigger. How much bigger? Agent Chen, Thompson's partner, spoke up for the first time. Big enough that Williams' bail was paid by a foundation that receives major donations from pharmaceutical companies. Big enough that the judge who approved his release has financial ties to the hospital's board of directors. Big enough that someone made some very powerful phone calls to get our investigation shut down. This wasn't just about one hospital anymore. This was about an entire network of corruption that extended from hospital administrators to pharmaceutical companies to federal judges. Williams hadn't been lying when he said he was just one piece of a larger puzzle. So what happens now? Dr. Chen asked. Now we regroup, Thompson said. We build an airtight case that can't be dismissed or manipulated, and we figure out exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. What? About Maria's charges? We're going to fight them. But Thompson looked uncomfortable. But I have to be honest with you. The evidence against her is solid, and the prosecution is being handled by people who seem very motivated to see her convicted. That's when Maria did something that surprised all of us. She stopped crying, wiped her eyes, and stood up with the same determined expression I'd seen in her kitchen. Agent Thompson, what if I told you that Williams wasn't the only one who got sloppy with his criminal activities? What do you mean? Maria pulled out her phone and opened a voice recording app. I mean that our meeting with Williams yesterday wasn't just a confrontation. It was also an opportunity to get him on record admitting to his crimes. She pressed play, and Williams' voice filled the room. The board will shut down the entire pediatric cancer program rather than deal with this scandal. Your son will die, and so will dozens of other kids. Thompson's eyes widened. Maria, please tell me you have more than that. Oh, I have much more than that. Maria smiled for the first time in hours. See, Augustus made one crucial mistake when he was threatening us. He assumed that a desperate mother and a rideshare driver couldn't possibly outmaneuver someone with his experience and connections. She pulled out a second phone, one I'd never seen before. But what he didn't know is that this desperate mother spent 6 months learning everything she could about surveillance, evidence gathering, and criminal prosecution. Every conversation I've had with Williams in the past month has been recorded. Every meeting, every phone call, every threat. Agent Chen leaned forward. Are you saying you have Williams on tape admitting to healthcare fraud? I'm saying I have Williams on tape admitting to healthcare fraud, extortion, conspiracy, and threatening the welfare of pediatric cancer patients. Maria's smile grew wider. I also have recordings of his conversations with board members, pharmaceutical reps, and federal contractors who've been helping him launder money. Thompson was staring at her like she'd just performed a magic trick. Maria, why didn't you tell us about these recordings yesterday? Because I needed to make sure Williams would incriminate himself completely before I revealed them, and because I needed to identify everyone in his network before they could destroy evidence or disappear. She opened the second phone and showed us a list of audio files, each one labeled with a date, time, and participant names. There were dozens of them. Williams has been running scared ever since David got sick, and I started asking questions about treatment approval. Maria explained, he's been making calls, having meetings, trying to shore up his operation. All I had to do was make sure those conversations got recorded. How did you manage that without anyone knowing? Dr. Chen asked. Because I'm a nurse, and nurses are invisible to hospital administrators. We're there all the time. We have access to everything, and people like Williams barely notice we exist unless they need something. Maria's voice hardened. It's amazing what people will say in front of someone they consider beneath them. Agent Thompson was looking through the recordings with growing excitement. Maria, if these contain what you say they contain, we're not just talking about Williams anymore. We're talking about a conspiracy that could reach all the way to the state medical board and beyond. And that's why Williams was so confident he could make this all go away. He wasn't just stealing money, he was part of a system that's been stealing money from sick children across multiple hospitals, maybe multiple states. I sat there listening to Maria explain how she'd spent months documenting one of the largest healthcare fraud schemes in recent history, and I realized I'd never really known her at all. The crying woman in my back seat had been real, but she'd also been one of the smartest, most determined people I'd ever met. So the charges against Maria, I asked, will be dropped as soon as we verify the authenticity of these recordings. Thompson said, Maria, you've just handed us the biggest healthcare fraud case of my career. But even as the FBI agents were getting excited about their expanded investigation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't out of the woods yet. Williams had been confident for a reason, and people who could arrange bail for a federal fraud suspect and manipulate media coverage weren't going to give up easily. Agent Thompson, I said, what kind of protection are we talking about here? Because if Williams is right about having powerful friends, they're not going to be happy about these recordings. Thompson's expression grew serious. That's a good question, Ryan. We're going to recommend that all three of you accept protective custody until we can arrest the other. Members of Williams Network. Protective custody. Dr. Chen looked alarmed. For how long? However long it takes. We're talking about people who've been stealing millions of dollars from Children's Cancer Treatment Fund. They're not going to hesitate to eliminate witnesses if they feel threatened. As if on cue, Maria's phone started ringing. Unknown number. Don't answer that, Agent Thompson said quickly. But the phone kept ringing, and after the fifth call, Maria's voicemail notification chimed. Thompson nodded for her to play it, and William's voice filled the room again. But this time it was different. Calm, confident, almost amused. Maria, my dear, I hope you're enjoying your moment of triumph. But I think you should know that my friends are very disappointed in how this situation has developed. They're particularly concerned about those recordings you've been making. The message continued. I suggest you and your new friends consider very carefully whether pursuing this investigation is worth the potential consequences. After all, it would be such a shame if something happened to interrupt David's treatment, or if Sophie's medical records revealed some unfortunate complications that required immediate attention. The line went dead, and we all sat there in stunned silence. Is he threatening our kids? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. That's exactly what he's doing, Thompson said grimly. And that, folks, is why we're going to bury this son of a bitch so deep. He'll never see daylight again. People, I thought we'd won. I thought justice had been served and our kids were safe. But you know what they say about cornered animals, they're at their most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. And Williams, he was about to show us exactly how dangerous a desperate criminal could be. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. The FBI moved Maria, Dr. Chen and me to a safe house outside the city while they worked to verify Maria's recordings and build their case against Williams Network. Sophie and David were transferred to a secure wing of the hospital under federal protection, which sounds dramatic until you realize it just meant there were agents in suits trying to blend in with the medical staff. I was going out of my mind with worry when Agent Thompson finally called us back to the federal building on Friday morning. This time, the conference room was packed with people I didn't recognize, federal prosecutors, representatives from the state medical board, and a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as the hospital's new interim CEO. Ladies and gentlemen, Thompson began, I'm pleased to report that Operation Clean House has been an unprecedented success. He clicked a remote, and a presentation screen lit up with what looked like an organizational chart from hell. William's face was at the center, connected by red lines to dozens of other Photos Hospital board members, pharmaceutical executives, federal contractors, and even a few faces I recognized from local news coverage. Thanks to the evidence provided by Nurse Santos and the cooperation of Dr. Chen and Mr. Martinez, we've uncovered a healthcare fraud network that spans 17 hospitals across 8 states. Thompson continued. Total estimated theft, $47 million over 6 years. $47 million. I couldn't even comprehend a number that large, but I could comprehend what it meant. Of families who'd been denied care, hundreds of children who'd suffered unnecessarily, all so people like Williams could line their pockets. The recordings Maria obtained proved to be even more valuable than we initially realized. Agent Chen added Williams wasn't just stealing from individual hospitals. He was part of a coordinated network that manipulated insurance approval, inflated drug prices, and created fake vendors to launder money. She clicked to the next slide, showing bank accounts and financial transfers. The pharmaceutical companies involved were paying kickbacks to hospital administrators in exchange for exclusive contracts and inflated pricing. A drug that should cost $5,000 was being billed to insurance companies for $20,000, with the extra $15,000 split between the hospital administrators and the pharmaceutical executives. Maria leaned forward. What about the other hospitals, the other families? As of this morning, federal agents have executed search warrants at 14 medical facilities, Thompson said. We've arrested 12 hospital administrators, 6 pharmaceutical executives, and 3 federal contractors. The investigation is ongoing, but we expect the final count to be much higher. The interim CEO, a sharp-looking woman named Rebecca Foster, spoke up. On behalf of Children's Memorial and the entire hospital system, I want to apologize to the families who were affected by this criminal conspiracy. Effective immediately, we're implementing new oversight procedure and establishing a legitimate patient assistance fund with recovered assets. What does that mean for the kids who were denied treatment? I asked. It means every child whose care was delayed or denied due to Williams' interference will receive immediate treatment authorization, Foster replied. We're also working with the FBI to identify families who were pressured into making illegal payments, and those funds will be returned. Thompson clicked to another slide showing before and after statistics. In the 6 months before Williams' arrest, treatment approval rates for experimental therapies at Children's Memorial were at 37%. As of this week, with the new oversight procedures in place, that rate has jumped to 89%. And our kids? Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. David starts the Johns Hopkins protocol on Monday. Full funding approved through the Legitimate Patient Assistance Program, and Sophie's treatment will continue without interruption. With all previous approvals reviewed and confirmed as medically appropriate, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. Our children were going to be okay. After everything we'd been through, all the risks we'd taken, the kids were going to get the treatment they needed. But Agent Thompson wasn't finished. There's one more thing you all need to know. Williams didn't just threaten you because he was angry about being caught. He threatened you because his network was planning to eliminate the evidence and the witnesses. He clicked to a slide showing surveillance photos of men in dark cars parked outside Maria's apartment, my house, and Dr. Chen's office. We intercepted communications planning to make your deaths look like accidents. A gas leak at Maria's apartment, a car accident for Ryan, a break-in gone wrong at Dr. Chen's house. Thompson's voice was ice cold. These people weren't just stealing money. They were prepared to commit murder to protect their operation. The room fell silent again as the full scope of what we'd been up against sank in. We hadn't just exposed financial fraud, we'd dismantled a criminal organization that was willing to kill to protect itself. What happens to Williams now? Dr. Chen asked. Williams is cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. Agent Chen replied. He's provided detailed information about the entire network, including bank account numbers, communication records, and the names of corrupt officials at every level. How reduced? I asked. 12 years instead of life without parole, Thompson said, which, considering that his actions contributed to the deaths of children who were denied treatment, is more than generous. 12 years, it seemed both too much and not nearly enough for a man who'd stolen from dying children. But if his cooperation brought down the entire network and prevented future victims, maybe it was worth it. Foster cleared her throat. There's one more thing. The hospital board has voted to establish the Maria Santos Patient Advocacy Fund, using the recovered assets from Williams' network. The fund will provide grants for experimental treatments, travel expenses for families seeking specialized care, and emergency assistance for medical bills. Maria started crying again, but this time they were tears of relief. You're naming it after me. You risked everything to expose this corruption, Foster said. You saved lives at the potential cost of your own freedom. It's the least we can do. Thompson stood up and walked over to the window overlooking the city. You know, in 20 years of investigating white-collar crime, I've never seen anything quite like this. Usually, when we catch someone in a scheme this big, they either lawyer up immediately or try to make a deal. Williams did both, but he also made a crucial mistake. What mistake? I asked. He underestimated the people he was stealing from. He thought desperate parents would be easy to manipulate and control. He thought a nurse would be too scared to fight back, that a rideshare driver wouldn't understand the complexities of financial crime, that a doctor would prioritize her career over her patients. Thompson turned back to face us. What he didn't understand is that when you threaten someone's child, you don't create a victim, you create an enemy. And enemies, like you three, they're willing to risk everything to win. As we left the federal building that afternoon, I felt like we were walking out of a nightmare and into something resembling normal life. The charges against Maria had been dropped. The hospital was implementing real reforms. Williams and his network were going to prison. And most importantly, our kids were going to get the treatment they needed. But the thing about fighting a battle like this is that it changes you. You can't go back to being the person who trusted that the system would take care of your child, who assumed that hospitals operated with the best interests of patients at heart, who believed that people in positions of power would never exploit desperate families. So what now? I asked Maria as we walked toward the hospital to check on our kids. Now we make sure this never happens again, she said. The fund is just the beginning. We're going to create a system that actually works for families like ours. You don't think I'm going back to just being a night shift nurse after all this, do you? She grinned. Foster offered me a position as Director of Patient Advocacy. My job will be to make sure no family ever has to choose between bankruptcy and their child's life. And Williams' threats, the people who were willing to kill us, are looking at federal racketeering charges and decades in prison, Dr. Chen said, joining our conversation as we reached the hospital entrance. Agent Thompson says the pharmaceutical executives are already turning on each other, trying to make deals. As we walked through the halls of children's memorial halls that had been the site of so much fear and desperation just a week ago, I marveled at how different everything felt. The same nurses were still rushing between rooms. The same families were still sitting in waiting areas hoping for good news. But there was something in the air that hadn't been there before. Hope, maybe, or just the knowledge that someone had finally stood up to the people who'd been profiting from children's suffering, and the final outcome. Well, folks, let me tell you, sometimes the good guys really do win. But more importantly, sometimes desperate parents can move mountains when they're fighting for their kids. What happened to all of us after the dust settled? That's a story worth telling too. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same hospital cafeteria, where this whole crazy adventure began, but everything had changed. The place still smelled like antiseptic and hope, but there was something different in the air, something lighter. Sophie was upstairs in the playroom, her hair finally growing back in soft blonde curls, teaching a new group of kids how to play Go Fish. Her latest scans had come back clean for the 3rd month in a row, and Dr. Chen said the word we'd all been afraid to hope for: remission. David was there too, looking more like the 11-year-old boy he was supposed to be and less like a patient fighting for his life. The Johns Hopkins protocol had worked better than anyone had dared to expect. The kid who'd wanted to be a doctor was now talking about becoming an FBI agent instead, inspired by the agents who'd helped bring down Williams' network. "You're early," Maria said, sliding into the seat across from me with 2 cups of coffee and a stack of files that had become as much a part of her as her nurse's badge used. 2B. Traffic was light. I lied. The truth was, I'd been looking forward to our weekly coffee meetings more than I cared to admit. After everything we'd been through together, Maria had become more than just Sophie's former nurse or a co-conspirator in exposing corruption. She'd become family. "How's the new job treating you?" I asked, gesturing to her files. Maria beamed. "Ryan, we've helped 12 families this week alone get approvals for treatments that would have been denied under the old system. 12 kids who are going to get a real chance at beating cancer." The Maria Santos Patient Advocacy Fund had become everything we'd hoped it would be and more. With the recovered funds from Williams' network and new donations from pharmaceutical companies trying to repair their reputations, the fund had already approved over $2 million in treatment assistance. "Any word on the appeals court decision?" I asked. "Came down yesterday," Maria said, unable to hide her satisfaction. Williams' sentence was upheld. 12 years, no possibility of early parole. His co-conspirators got similar sentences, and the pharmaceutical executives are looking at federal racketeering charges. It still amazed me how far the investigation had reached. The original Children's Memorial case had blown up into a multi-state federal prosecution that made national headlines. Congressional hearings had been called, new healthcare fraud prevention measures had been passed, and several major pharmaceutical companies had been forced to pay massive fines and implement new oversight procedures. "You know what the best part is?" Maria continued. "The new CEO at Medicorp, pharmaceutical company that was paying Williams kickbacks, called me personally last week to apologize and offer additional funding for pediatric cancer research. From villain to hero in 6 months." I said, "How does it feel?" "Terrifying, mostly," Maria admitted. "Some days I still can't believe we actually pulled it off. 3 amateurs taking down a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. It sounds like something out of a movie. Well, we had help from some very professional federal agents. True, but they never would have found Williams without us being desperate enough to look where no one else was looking." Maria stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "You know what I learned from all this?" "What's that?" "That sometimes the people closest to a problem are the only ones who can see it. Clearly, the FBI knew healthcare fraud existed, but they didn't know how it affected families like ours. The hospital administration knew there were budget issues, but they didn't know patients were dying because of stolen funds." She was right. It had taken a nurse willing to break the law and a rideshare driver with nothing to lose to expose what dozens of auditors and investigators had missed. "Speaking of new perspectives," I said, "I have some news of my own." "Oh yeah, Rebecca Foster offered me a job." Maria nearly choked on her coffee. "Doing what? Heading up the new patient family financial advocacy office. Apparently, my experience with medical bills and my unique investigative skills make me qualified to help other families navigate the system." "Ryan, that's amazing. Are you going to take it?" I'd been thinking about Foster's offer for weeks. It would mean giving up my rideshare driving, taking a huge pay cut initially, and learning an entirely new career. But it would also mean making sure no other parent had to go through what I'd experienced: the sleepless nights wondering if you could afford to keep your child alive, the humiliation of begging insurance companies for coverage, the desperation that made people like Maria and me willing to risk everything. "Yeah," I said, "I think I am, but only on one condition." "What's that?" "That you and I work together. This advocacy thing, this fight for families, I don't want to do it without my partner in crime." Maria grinned. "You know, I was hoping you'd say that, because Foster already cleared it with the board. The Maria Santos Fund is being expanded into a full advocacy program, and we're going to need someone who understands both the financial side and the family side of medical care." Before I could respond, Sophie and David came bounding into the cafeteria, both of them grinning like they'd just won the lottery. Dad. Sophie was practically bouncing with excitement. "David taught me how to hack the hospital's video game system so we can play multiplayer games." "You taught her to hack what now?" I asked, looking at David with a mixture of amusement and concern. David shrugged with the kind of nonchalance only an 11-year-old could manage. "It's not really hacking. It's just exploiting a vulnerability in their network architecture. Maria's teaching me about cybersecurity." "Great," I muttered. "My daughter's going to become a criminal because her hospital friend is apparently a junior hacktivist." "Actually," Maria said, laughing, "David's been helping me identify security weaknesses in the hospital's financial systems. Kid's got a real talent for finding holes in digital infrastructure, and I'm teaching him about constitutional law." Sophie added proudly, "Did you know the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures?" I stared at my 8-year-old daughter, who was apparently discussing constitutional law with an Hacker, while recovering from cancer treatment, what have you two been doing up there? Planning, David said, matter-of-factly. When we grow up, Sophie's going to be a lawyer, and I'm going to be an FBI cybersecurity specialist. We're going to be partners and catch bad guys who steal from kids. Just like you and Maria did, Sophie added. I looked at these two kids, my daughter and Maria's son, both of whom had stared death in the face and come out stronger, and realized that our fight had given them something more valuable than just medical treatment. It had given them the knowledge that ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win, that justice was possible even when the odds seemed impossible. You know what? I said, pulling both kids into a hug. I think that sounds like an excellent plan. 3 years later, I'm writing this story from my office at Children's Memorial, where I now serve as Director of Family Financial Advocacy. The walls are covered with thank you letters from families we've helped, photos of kids who've beaten cancer with treatments funded by our program, and newspaper clippings about healthcare reform legislation that was inspired by our case. Maria's office is right down the hall, and every morning we meet to review new cases and plan our strategy for helping families navigate the system. David, now 14 and cancer-free for 2 years, volunteers in our office after school, teaching other kids about computer programming and helping their parents understand medical billing. Sophie, 11 and officially in remission, is already talking about law school and specializing in healthcare advocacy. Dr. Chen runs the new pediatric oncology research program, funded by penalties levied against the pharmaceutical companies that were part of Williams' network. She's overseen the development of 3 new treatment protocols that have improved survival rates across the board. Williams is serving his sentence at a federal facility in Ohio. I've never visited him, never written him a letter, never thought about him, except when families ask me how we managed to change the system. The truth is, Williams didn't change anything. He was just one symptom of a much larger disease. What changed things was a bunch of desperate parents deciding that their children's lives were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The other day, a father came to my office with the same look I used to see in the mirror every morning, exhausted, terrified, drowning in medical bills and bureaucratic obstacles. His son had been diagnosed with the same type of leukemia that nearly took Sophie and David. His insurance company had denied coverage for the treatment his child needed. I sat down with him, pulled out the files that would authorize his son's treatment through our advocacy fund, and told him something I wish someone had told me 3 years ago. You're not in this fight alone anymore. That's what this whole experience taught me. That change doesn't happen because politicians pass laws or because hospital administrators suddenly develop consciences. Change happens because ordinary people decide they're not going to accept the unacceptable anymore. It happens because a nurse loves her son enough to risk everything to save him. Because a rideshare driver realizes that some rides are more important than getting from point A to point B. Because a doctor decides that her oath to do no harm applies to fighting the people who are harming her patients. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, it happens because a couple of kids decide they're going to grow up and make sure no other family has to go through what theirs did. 6 months ago, if someone had told me that a single rideshare pickup would lead to exposing a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy and completely changing my life's direction, I would have said they were crazy. Now I know better. Sometimes the most ordinary moments lead to the most extraordinary changes. Sometimes a desperate phone call at 2 a.m. is exactly what the world needs to hear. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. So that's my story, folks. That's how a single night driving strangers around turned into the most important thing I've ever done with my life. I hope it reminds you that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're fighting for something that matters. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to choose between what's easy and what's right, remember Maria, David, Sophie, and the power of refusing to give up.